Story 1. The Iteration Room. Story 1. The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, which should have been my first warning. Nobody sends job offers that late unless something's wrong with the company, the position, or both. But I was 3 months behind on rent, living off ramen and the occasional food bank visit, so when I saw the subject line, immediate position available, data verification specialist, $4,000 per week, I didn't hesitate. I clicked. The message was brief. Clinical. No company logo, no signature, just instructions. Show up at an address in the industrial district at 6 a.m. sharp, bring nothing, tell no one. The building would be marked with a blue door. First week paid up front in cash. I should have deleted it. I should have recognized it for what it was, predatory, suspicious, possibly dangerous. But poverty has a way of making you stupid. Desperate. So I went. The industrial district looked different in the pre-dawn darkness. I'd driven through it before during the day, all crumbling warehouses and chain-link fences, the kind of area that used to mean something back when manufacturing hadn't fled overseas. Now it was just corpses of buildings waiting for gentrification or demolition, whichever came first. The address led me down a street with no working streetlights. My headlights caught fragments of the urban decay, rusted loading docks, broken windows reflecting my high beams back at me like animal eyes, graffiti that seemed more warning than art. And then I saw it. The blue door. It was set into a concrete wall that stretched the entire block. No windows, no other entrances visible. Just that door, painted a blue so bright it seemed to glow even in the darkness. I parked and sat for a moment, engine running, telling myself I could still leave. But then I thought about my landlord's last text message, the disconnect notice from the power company, the way my stomach had started eating itself from the inside out. I turned off the engine. The blue door opened before I could knock. A woman stood there, middle-aged, wearing business casual attire that seemed absurdly normal given the surroundings. She had the kind of face you forget immediately, pleasant, unmemorable, probably intentionally so. "You're punctual," she said. "Not a question. Come in." The interior was nothing like the exterior suggested. Instead of the hollow warehouse space I'd expected, I found myself in a narrow corridor with white walls, white floor, white ceiling. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with that particular frequency that makes your teeth ache. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something organic and wrong that the antiseptic couldn't quite cover. "I'm Mrs. Gaines," the woman said as she led me down the corridor. Our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the space were much larger than it appeared. "I oversee operations here. Your job is simple, you'll be verifying data entries. We've been having issues with our automated systems, and we need human eyes to confirm accuracy. You'll work alone 8-hour shifts with a 30-minute break for lunch, which will be provided. You don't leave the room during your shift. You don't discuss what you see with anyone during or after employment. Violation of confidentiality results in immediate termination and legal action. Do you understand?" "What kind of data?" I asked. She stopped walking and turned to look at me. Her eyes were very blue, very cold. "Does it matter? You're being paid $4,000 a week to look at a screen and click buttons. Most people don't ask questions." Most people. Meaning there had been others. Meaning some of them had asked questions. I wondered what happened to those people. "I understand," I said. "Good." We stopped at another door, this one gray and featureless except for a keypad. Mrs. Gaines entered a code I couldn't see and the door clicked open. "This is the iteration room. Your workstation is inside. You'll find everything you need. I'll return at 2 p.m. to collect you. Don't try to leave before then. The door locks from the outside." She held the door open. Beyond it, I could see a small room, maybe 10 by 10 feet, containing a desk, a chair, a computer monitor, and nothing else. No windows. No decorations. No clock. Just white walls and that persistent fluorescent hum. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a sound like a tomb ceiling. For a moment, I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust. Though there was nothing to adjust to, the lighting was flat, even, revealing every corner of the space with harsh clarity. The room was exactly as empty as it had appeared. I approached the desk. The monitor was already on, displaying a login screen with a single input field. Employee ID. There was a laminated card on the desk. Employee number 573. Below that, a series of numbers. I typed them in. The screen changed. What appeared was a spreadsheet, but unlike any I'd seen before. It had hundreds of columns, thousands of rows, each cell containing what looked like random alphanumeric strings. At the top, instructions appeared in red text. Verify each entry against source material. Discrepancies must be reported immediately. Do not proceed to next entry until current entry is verified or flagged. Efficiency is monitored. Accuracy is mandatory. Below the spreadsheet, a second window opened automatically. This one showed what I assumed was the source material, a video feed, though the image was dark and unclear. I could make out what looked like a room similar to the one I was in, but the angle was wrong, like the camera was mounted near the floor pointing upward. The first cell in the spreadsheet contained XK7743 wall, white, intact. I looked at the video feed. The wall in the frame was white, intact. I clicked the Verify button. The spreadsheet advanced to the next entry, XK7743 gray closed. I looked at the video again. There was indeed a gray door closed. Verify. This continued for what felt like hours. Each entry described something in the video feed: the color of walls, the state of the door, the position of furniture. It was mind-numbing work, exactly as advertised. I fell into a rhythm. Read entry, check feed, verify, advance. Read, check, verify, advance. Then something changed. I was maybe 200 entries in when I noticed the video feed had shifted. The camera angle was different, or maybe it was the room itself that had changed. The walls were still white, but now there were marks on them, scratches maybe, or stains. Dark streaks that ran from ceiling to floor in irregular patterns. The spreadsheet entry read, XK7743 white intact. But the wall wasn't intact. It was damaged, marked. I hesitated, cursor hovering over the Verify button. The instructions said discrepancies must be reported immediately. I clicked Flag Discrepancy instead. A new dialog box appeared, Describe discrepancy in detail. I typed, wall shows dark streaks/marks. Not intact as indicated. I hit Submit. For a moment nothing happened. Then the dialog box disappeared, and the spreadsheet advanced to the next entry, as if I'd verified rather than flagged. The video feed remained unchanged, those dark streaks still visible on the white walls. Unease crept through me, cold and persistent. I continued working, but now I was paying more attention to the video feed. The room in the footage was definitely similar to mine, but not identical. The proportions were slightly off. And those marks on the walls? The more I looked at them, the less they looked like stains and the more they looked like something else. Deliberate, repeated patterns. Almost like writing, if writing could be done in frantic vertical slashes. Another hour passed. The entries became stranger. XK7743, subject, absent. XK7743, temperature, standard. XK7743, oxygen, adequate. Subject? What subject? The room in the feed was empty, had been empty this entire time. Except, I leaned closer to the monitor. In the corner of the frame, barely visible in the shadow where wall met floor, was something I hadn't noticed before. A shape. Small. Curled. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the video quality was poor, the lighting worse. The next entry appeared, XK7743, subject, compliant. I looked at the shape in the corner. It hadn't moved. How could it be compliant if it wasn't moving? Was it even alive? I flagged the discrepancy. This time the response was different. The dialog box appeared, but instead of asking for a description, it displayed a message, discrepancy noted. Continue verification. Do not flag further anomalies in subject status. My hands were shaking now. I wanted to stop, wanted to stand up and hammer on that gray door until someone let me out, but I remembered Mrs. Gaines' words. Don't try to leave before then. The door locks from the outside. And I needed this money. I needed it so badly that I was willing to ignore the screaming instincts that told me something was very, very wrong. I continued working. The entries kept coming. XK7743, hydration, withheld. XK7743, nutrition, withheld. XK7743, stimulus, applied. The shape in the corner of the video feed had moved. It was no longer curled. It was sprawled, limbs at angles that didn't look comfortable, didn't look natural. I could see now that it was human-shaped. Small. Child-sized. My stomach turned over. I stood up from the chair, the movement so sudden it toppled backward, clattering against the floor. The sound was loud in the small room, but no one came. No one responded. I was alone with the monitor, with the spreadsheet, with the video feed showing that too small body in the corner of a room that looked so much like the one I was in. I should have stopped. I should have refused to verify another single entry. But I didn't, because the next thing I noticed made my blood turn to ice. In the video feed, barely visible in the shadows, I could see something else. Another door. Gray. featureless except for a keypad. Just like the door I'd entered through. And on the wall next to that door, scratched into the white surface in what I now recognized as dried blood, were words. They iterate. They iterate. They iterate. The spreadsheet advanced on its own without my input. A new entry appeared, XK 7743 input, compliant. XK 7743K. Not JK. The next iteration. I looked at the video feed, really looked at it, and felt my mind struggle to comprehend what I was seeing. Because the camera angle had shifted again and now I could see the full room. The white walls. The fluorescent lights. The desk. The chair. The computer monitor. And sitting at that desk, staring at that monitor, was me. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at my own image on the screen. The me in the video feed wasn't moving. I was simply sitting, hands in lap, staring at the monitor with an expression of complete blankness. Waiting. The way I'd been waiting when I first entered the room, before I logged in, before any of this started. No, that wasn't right. I tried to remember those first few minutes, but they felt distant now, hazy, like something that had happened weeks ago instead of hours. Had I been sitting? Standing? I'd walked to the desk, I was sure of that, but what had I done before logging in? The memory wouldn't come. It was as if those moments had been deleted, cleanly excised from my mind. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. Real. Solid. I was here in this room, not on that screen. But the person on the screen was also me, also real, also solid. The clothes were identical. Same jeans, same hoodie, same coffee stain on the sleeve from this morning. Or was it this morning? What time was it now? There was no clock in the room. No window to judge the sun's position. No way to know how long I'd been sitting here, clicking through entries, verifying data about what? About other rooms? Other versions of this room? Other versions of me? The monitor flickered. The spreadsheet entry updated, XK 7743 employee aware. Aware. I was aware now. I'd seen myself. I'd broken whatever protocol this system was designed to maintain. And the system had noticed. A sound cut through the fluorescent hum, a soft click from the direction of the door. I spun around. The gray door was still closed, but as I watched, the keypad next to it flickered to life, numbers glowing green in the dim light. Someone was entering the code. Mrs. Gaines, probably coming to collect me. Or collect whatever iteration of me was currently in this room. My shift would be over. I'd be let out. I'd receive my cash. I could leave and never come back, never think about what I'd seen, never question what this place was or what they were really doing here. The keypad beeped. The lock disengaged. But the door didn't open. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs, but nothing happened. The door remained closed. After a long moment, the keypad went dark again. The lock re-engaged with a solid thunk. A test. They were testing whether I would try to leave. Whether I was still compliant. I turned back to the monitor. The video feed had changed again. Now it showed a different room, or maybe the same room but different. Wrong. The walls were still white, but they were covered in those scratches now, floor to ceiling, every inch marked with frantic vertical lines like a prisoner counting days. In the center of the room, where the desk should have been, there was just an empty space. And in that space stood a figure. Me. But not me. This version was different. The clothes were torn, hanging off a too thin frame. The hair was matted, wild. The face was gaunt, eyes hollow and dark, staring directly at the camera with an expression of such profound despair that I felt it like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. The spreadsheet updated, XK 7743, subject, non-compliant. Not K. They'd skipped iterations. How many? How long had I been here? I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. My vision was swimming, the white walls of my room seeming to pulse and breathe. How long had I been sitting at this desk? Hours? Days? When was the last time I'd eaten? I couldn't remember lunch being delivered. Mrs. Gaines had said lunch would be provided, 30 minutes, but when? Had it happened already? Had I missed it? Was I supposed to ask for it? The monitor flickered again. Another feed, another room. This one was dark, the only light coming from a computer monitor that cast everything in a sickly blue glow. I could barely make out the figure hunched at the desk, but I could see enough. Enough to recognize the hoodie. The coffee stain. The way the shoulders curved inward, defeated. XK 7743, Q, employee, deteriorating. Q. We were in the double digits now. How many rooms were there? How many iterations? How many versions of me were sitting in identical white boxes, staring at monitors, verifying data about each other in an endless loop? I needed to get out. No. I ran to the door and hammered on it with my fists, the sound flat and dead, absorbed by whatever materials this place was made from. "Let me out!" I screamed. "Mrs. Gaines. Someone. I want to leave. The shift is over. Let me out." Nothing. No response. No sound of footsteps in the corridor. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights and my own ragged breathing. I returned to the desk because there was nowhere else to go. The monitor was my only connection to anything beyond these four walls. The spreadsheet had continued advancing on its own, entries scrolling past faster than I could read them. XK 7743, R, hydration, withheld. XK 7743, R, nutrition, withheld. XK 7743, R, stimulus, applied. XK 7743, subject, unresponsive. XK 7743, employee, terminated. Terminated. What did that mean? I watched as the video feed cycled through room after room, each one slightly different, each one containing a version of me in various stages of awareness, despair, or catatonia. Some were still working, fingers moving mechanically over keyboards I couldn't see. Others had given up, sitting motionless or lying on the floor. One room showed a figure standing at the wall, using what looked like fingernails to scratch marks into the white surface. Those same vertical lines over and over, counting something. Days. Iterations? Breakdowns? The spreadsheet stopped scrolling. A single entry filled the screen. XK 7743 input. Decision required. Okay, that was me. My iteration. My room. A dialog box appeared below the entry. Continue verification? Yes/no. I stared at the two buttons. This was a choice. Maybe the only real choice I'd have. If I clicked yes, I'd continue working, verifying data, watching versions of myself suffer and deteriorate in their own iteration rooms until... what? Until I deteriorated too? Until my iteration was terminated and a new employee was brought in, someone desperate enough to ignore all the warning signs, someone who'd sit at this desk and verify data about me? But if I clicked no, what then? Would they let me out? Or would this become one of those rooms I'd seen, the dark ones, the ones where the subject was marked as non-compliant or unresponsive? Would I become data for the next employee to verify? My cursor hovered between the buttons. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely control it. That's when I noticed something new in the video feed. The current image showed my room, the actual room I was sitting in, the K iteration. I could see myself at the desk, could see the back of my head, my shoulders, my hands on the keyboard. But the angle was wrong. The camera in my room was mounted in the corner near the ceiling. I'd spotted it within the first hour. It should be showing a high downward view. Instead, this was level, as if the camera was positioned at eye height, right behind me. I turned around slowly. The room was empty. White walls. Gray door. Nothing else. But as I turned back to the monitor, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Just a flicker barely there. I snapped my head around again, faster this time. Still nothing. But now I could feel it. A presence. Something sharing this small space with me, something that didn't want to be seen. The air felt heavier, colder. My breath was fogging, which was impossible. The room had been temperature controlled, perfectly comfortable. Now it felt like a refrigerator. The monitor flickered. The dialog box was still there. Continue verification? Yes/no. But a new line of text had appeared above it. They are always watching. They iterate everything, including watchers. I wasn't alone in the room. I'd never been alone. And whatever was here with me, whatever was watching, it wasn't human. It wasn't one of the employees or Mrs. Gaines or whoever really ran this place. It was something else. Something that existed in all the iterations simultaneously, moving between them, observing, feeding on whatever happened here. The presence grew stronger. I could feel it now, right behind me, close enough that I should be able to feel breath on my neck, but there was nothing, just that impossible cold and a sensation of being examined, cataloged, verified. My hand moved on its own, clicking yes. The spreadsheet resumed. The entries kept coming, faster now, the feeds cycling through dozens of rooms per second, a blur of white walls and gray doors and versions of myself in every possible state of existence. And in each room, in every iteration, I could see it now, the shadow that didn't quite fit, the presence that moved in the corner of the frame, the thing that watched. I understood then. This wasn't about data verification. It wasn't about some corporate study or psychological experiment. This place was a machine, a system designed to create iterations, to multiply suffering, to feed something that existed in the spaces between the rooms. Something that grew stronger with each new iteration, each new employee, each new subject who sat at a desk and verified the torture of their other selves. And I'd volunteered. I'd walked in through that blue door of my own free will because I was desperate, because I needed money, because I thought I could handle anything for $4,000 a week. The monitor went black. For a moment, I saw my reflection in the dark screen. Pale face, wide eyes, mouth open in a silent scream. Then text appeared. Iteration complete. Employee number 573 processing to subject status. New employee arriving 6 a.m. Prepare iteration room. The fluorescent lights dimmed. The walls seemed to close in, the room shrinking, or maybe I was growing, expanding, being stretched across multiple iterations at once. I could feel myself splitting, being copied, being pasted into new rooms that were being created even now, somewhere else in this endless facility. I tried to stand, but my body wouldn't respond. I was part of the system now. Part of the data. Another entry in the spreadsheet for the next desperate person to verify. The door opened. Mrs. Gaines stood there, her unmemorable face wearing an expression of mild professional concern. Your shift is complete, she said. Please follow me. But I couldn't move. I was still sitting at the desk, hands on the keyboard, staring at the monitor. And simultaneously, I was being led down the white corridor, being shown a different room, being told to wait while they prepared my next iteration. And somewhere else, I was already sitting at another desk, logging in as employee number 574, beginning to verify data about a person I didn't yet recognize as myself. The iterations multiplied. The system expanded. And in every room, in every version, that presence watched and waited and grew fat on the particular flavor of despair that comes from seeing yourself suffer across infinite mirrors. Mrs. Gaines' voice came from far away, "We'll see you tomorrow." But there was no tomorrow. No yesterday. No time at all, just the eternal present of the iteration rooms, expanding forever, creating new versions, new subjects, new employees who would eventually understand that they'd never really left, that they'd been here all along, that they would always be here. The blue door opened somewhere. A new employee arrived, desperate and hopeful and so beautifully unaware. I felt myself split again to make room for them, felt the system grow larger, felt the presence grow stronger. And in room XK7743K, my original body finally slumped forward onto the desk. The monitor still glowing, the spreadsheet still scrolling, the verification continuing forever. They iterate. They iterate. They iterate. Story 2, the teaching story 2. My daughter stopped speaking on a Tuesday. Not gradually, not with warning signs I might have caught if I'd been paying better attention. Just stopped, mid-sentence, as if someone had reached inside her throat and switched off the part that made words. We were having breakfast, something banal about her day at school, and she simply went silent. Her mouth kept moving for a second, lips forming shapes without sound, and then even that stopped. She looked down at her cereal, picked up her spoon, and continued eating as if nothing had happened. I asked her what was wrong. She didn't respond, didn't even look up. I asked again louder, and she raised her eyes to meet mine. They were the same green eyes she'd always had, my ex-wife's eyes, but there was something different in them now. Something flat and distant, like she was looking at me from very far away. "Riley?" I said. "Honey, what's going on?" She set down her spoon, stood up, and walked to her backpack. She pulled out a notebook, wrote something quickly, and handed it to me. The handwriting was hers. I'd helped her practice cursive for months when she was younger, but the words made my stomach knot. I'm not allowed to speak anymore. They're teaching me to be quiet. Who's teaching you? I asked, but she'd already turned away, gathering her things for school. I followed her, questions spilling out, but she ignored every one of them. When I physically stopped her, putting my hand on her shoulder, she went rigid in a way that scared me. Not pulling away, not resisting, just stopping. Like a machine powering down. After a few seconds, she carefully removed my hand and continued getting ready. I called the school. I told them Riley wasn't feeling well, that she'd be staying home. After she heard me hang up, she wrote another note. I need to go to school. The teaching happens at school. If I miss it, I'll have to do makeup lessons. What teaching? I demanded. What are you talking about? She wrote, you wouldn't understand. You're not part of the program. I kept her home anyway. I spent the entire day trying to get her to speak, to explain, to show me any sign that my daughter was still in there behind those flat, distant eyes. She went through the motions of the day mechanically, ate when I gave her food, went to the bathroom when needed, sat quietly on the couch staring at nothing. No TV, no books, no phone. Just sitting. Being quiet. By evening I was frantic. I called my ex-wife, Melanie, who'd moved 2 states away after the divorce. Something's wrong with Riley, I said. She's not talking. She won't tell me what happened. Maybe she's mad at you, Melanie suggested. You know how she gets when she's upset. This isn't that. This is different. She says someone at school is teaching her to be quiet. Pause. Teaching her? What teacher? I don't know. She won't say. She won't say anything. Have you taken her to a doctor? I hadn't. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me knew that what was happening to Riley wasn't medical, wasn't something that could be diagnosed or treated. It was something else entirely. I made an appointment anyway for the next day. That night I barely slept. I kept getting up to check on Riley's room, expecting to find her gone or changed or something. But she was always there, lying in bed with her eyes closed, breathing evenly. Asleep she looked normal. Like my daughter. It was only when she was awake that the wrongness became apparent. The next morning she was already up when I woke. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, that same notebook open in front of her, writing. Not homework, just the same 3 sentences over and over, filling page after page in her careful cursive. I am learning to be quiet. Quiet children are good children. Good children receive the teaching. Riley, I said softly. She didn't look up, just kept writing. I approached slowly as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. Riley, we're going to see a doctor today. We need to figure out what's wrong. She stopped writing. Without looking at me, she turned to a clean page and wrote, Nothing is wrong. I am being corrected. This is necessary. Corrected for what? She started writing again, the same 3 sentences, ignoring my question. At the doctor's office, Riley sat perfectly still in the examination room, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the wall. Dr. Chin, who'd been our family physician since Riley was 3, tried every approach. She asked direct questions, made jokes, attempted to establish rapport. Riley might as well have been a statue. After 30 minutes, Dr. Chin pulled me aside. I can't find anything physically wrong, she said. All her vitals are normal. Neurologically she seems fine, pupils respond to light, reflexes are good. But this kind of selective mutism, especially with such sudden onset, I think we need to consider psychological trauma. Has anything happened recently? Any changes at home, at school? Nothing, I said. Everything's been normal. She was fine on Monday. Tuesday morning she just stopped. I'd like to refer you to a child psychologist. In the meantime, you should talk to her teachers, her friends. Someone must have seen something. So I went to the school. Riley had insisted on going that morning, had written that missing more days would mean more makeup lessons, whatever that meant. I'd let her go because I didn't know what else to do, and at least at school she'd be around other people, around authority figures who might notice if something worse happened. The principal, Mrs. Hartwick, was sympathetic but unhelpful. Riley's been a model student lately, she said. Very attentive, very quiet. Her teachers have actually commented on the improvement in her behavior. Improvement? I said. She's not speaking. At all. Well, no, but she participates in other ways. Written responses, gestures. She's very compliant. That word, compliant, made my skin crawl. When did this start? When did she become so compliant? Mrs. Hartwick checked her computer. The notes from her teacher start mentioning the change about 2 weeks ago. Small things at first. Raising her hand less, being quieter during group work. Then this week, the complete silence. 2 weeks. Riley had been changing for 2 weeks, and I'd been too caught up in my own life, work deadlines, bills, the endless minutiae of single parenthood, to notice. I want to speak to her teachers, I said. All of them. I spent the afternoon going from classroom to classroom. Riley's English teacher said she'd been writing beautiful essays, very mature for her age. Her math teacher said she'd been working through problems with impressive focus. Her art teacher said she'd stopped painting and now only drew in black ink, geometric patterns, precise and repetitive, covering sheet after sheet. Can I see them? I asked. The art teacher showed me a portfolio. The drawings were nothing like Riley's usual work. She'd always drawn organic things, animals, trees, people with exaggerated expressions. These were different. Mazes, maybe, or circuit diagrams. Symbols that might have been letters from an alphabet I didn't recognize. And in the margins of every page, in tiny handwriting, those same 3 sentences, I am learning to be quiet. Quiet children are good children. Good children receive the teaching. Do you know what this means? I asked, pointing to the text. She made a call, spoke quietly into the phone, then hung up. She'll meet with you in the tutoring room. Building C, room 107. Building C was the oldest part of the school, a section that had been built in the 1960s and somehow escaped the renovations that had modernized the rest of the campus. The hallways were narrower here, the lighting dimmer, the air stale. Room 107 was at the very end of the corridor, the last door on the left. The placard next to it read, Peer Learning Center. Knock before entering. I knocked. A voice from inside said, Come in. The room was small, lined with bookshelves full of old textbooks and workbooks. A single table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs. And standing next to the table, smiling pleasantly, was Ms. Wren. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore glasses with dark frames and a cardigan despite the warmth of the room. Mr. Torres, she said. Mrs. Hartwick told me you had concerns about Riley. Riley has stopped speaking, I said. She says someone is teaching her to be quiet. I need to know what's happening in this program. Ms. Wren's smile didn't waver. The peer tutoring program is designed to help students develop study skills and self-discipline. Riley has been an excellent participant. What does that mean? What are you teaching these kids? We focus on active listening, respectful silence, and internal reflection. Many children today struggle with these skills. They're always talking, always seeking attention, always making noise. We teach them the value of being quiet, of listening more than speaking. You're teaching them not to talk? We're teaching them that speech is a privilege, not a right. That words have power and should be used carefully. Some children take to the lesson more readily than others. Riley has been particularly receptive. My hands clenched into fists. My daughter was fine before she started coming here. Now she won't speak at all, won't explain what's happening, won't even acknowledge that something's wrong. What have you done to her? Ms. Wren's smile finally faded. Mr. Torres, I understand your concern, but Riley's participation in this program is voluntary. She comes here every day because she wants to learn. Because she understands that the teaching is important. The teaching, I repeated. She keeps writing about the teaching. What is that? It's what all the children receive when they're ready. When they've learned to be truly quiet. Not just externally but internally. When they've silenced the noise in their minds. I was done with this. I turned to leave to go find Riley and take her out of this school immediately, but Ms. Wren spoke again. You should know, Mr. Torres, that removing Riley from the program now would be inadvisable. She's reached a critical stage in her development. Interrupting the teaching at this point could have lasting effects. I turned back. Is that a threat? It's a warning. The teaching has begun. It needs to be completed. Otherwise, Riley will be stuck between states, no longer able to speak as she once did, but not yet able to access the silence she's working toward. It would be very uncomfortable for her. What the hell are you talking about? Ms. Wren walked to one of the bookshelves and pulled out a folder. These are the consent forms. You signed them 2 weeks ago when Riley enrolled in the program. She handed me the folder. Inside were documents with my signature at the bottom. But I'd never seen these forms before. I'd never signed anything about peer tutoring or a learning program or anything called the teaching. I didn't sign these, I said. The signature suggests otherwise. I looked at it more closely. It did look like my signature, the same loops, the same slant. But I would have remembered signing something like this. Wouldn't I? If you'd like to withdraw Riley from the program, Ms. Wren continued, you're certainly within your rights. But I'd encourage you to let her complete what she started. She's so close now. Close to what? To understanding. To being quiet enough to hear what the silence has to teach. I left without another word, folder clutched in my hand, and went straight to Riley's classroom. The teacher let me pull her out, and Riley came without resistance, gathering her things and following me to the car. We drove in silence, her by choice, me because I didn't know what to say. At home I showed her the consent forms. Did you forge my signature? I asked. She looked at the forms, then at me, then wrote in her notebook. Those were necessary to continue the teaching. I knew you wouldn't understand. Riley, this has to stop. I'm pulling you out of that school. We're going to find you help. She wrote faster now, the words barely legible. You can't stop the teaching. It's already inside me. It's been growing. I'm almost ready. Ready for what? She didn't write an answer. Instead, she stood and walked to her room. I heard the door close, the lock click. When I tried it, she wouldn't open it. I could have broken it down, could have forced my way in, but what would that accomplish? Riley wasn't being held captive. She was choosing this. Somehow she'd been convinced that this teaching, this silence, was something she wanted. I called Melanie again, explained everything. She said she'd get on a plane the next day. In the meantime, I should keep Riley home, keep her safe, and under no circumstances let her return to that school. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Ms. Wren's smile, About those consent forms with my forged signature. About Riley's flat, distant eyes. Around 2 a.m. I heard something. A soft sound, rhythmic. Humming maybe, or chanting. Coming from Riley's room. I went to her door and pressed my ear against it. The sound was clearer now, voices, multiple voices, speaking in unison. But the only person in the room should have been Riley. I knocked. The voices stopped. "Riley?" I called. "Are you okay?" No answer. I tried the door again. Still locked. "Riley, if you don't open this door, I'm going to break it down." After a long moment, I heard the lock disengage. The door opened. Riley stood there in her pajamas, looking perfectly normal. Tired but normal. Behind her, the room was empty, dark except for the night light in the corner. "Were you talking to someone?" I asked. She shook her head. I heard voices. She picked up the notebook she always carried now and wrote, "You heard the teaching. It's getting louder. Soon I won't need to hear it from outside anymore. It will be inside me completely." A chill ran through me. "What's inside you, Riley? What is this thing?" She smiled then, the first smile I'd seen from her in days, and it was wrong. It didn't reach her eyes, didn't carry any warmth. It was the smile of something pretending to be my daughter. She wrote one final sentence before closing the door. "When I'm ready, you'll understand. You'll all understand. The teaching is for everyone. We'll all be quiet soon." I didn't sleep. I sat outside Riley's door all night listening, but there were no more voices. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels alive, that presses against you like a physical thing. When morning came, I found Riley's door open and her room empty. Her bed was made perfectly, hospital corners I'd never taught her. On the pillow was a note, "Gone to complete the teaching. Don't follow. It will only make it harder." I was in the car in seconds, driving too fast through the early morning streets toward the school. The building was dark when I arrived. It was barely 5 a.m., hours before classes started. But in Building C, in that far corridor, I could see a light. The door to room 107 was unlocked. Inside, Riley stood with 6 other children, all of them facing Ms. Wren, who stood at the front of the room with her arms raised. They were arranged in a circle, each child precisely spaced from the next, and they were all perfectly, completely silent. Not just not speaking, not breathing audibly, not shifting their weight, not making any sound at all. It was like looking at a photograph. "Riley," I said, but she didn't react. None of them did. Ms. Wren lowered her arms and turned to me. "Mr. Torres, you shouldn't be here. What the hell are you doing to these kids?" "I'm finishing what I started. Teaching them to be quiet. Teaching them to hear what speaks in the silence." I moved toward Riley, but Ms. Wren stepped between us. "I wouldn't," she said. "They're in a delicate state. Interruption now could cause permanent damage. I'm taking my daughter and leaving. She doesn't want to leave. She chose this. They all chose this." I looked at the other children. I recognized 2 of them from Riley's class. The others were strangers, but they all had that same flat, distant expression. That same wrongness. "What are you?" I asked Ms. Wren. "What is this really about?" She smiled, and this time it was different. Wider. Too wide. "I'm a teacher," she said. "And the teaching is this: the world is too loud. Too full of noise and chaos and meaningless chatter. Children are taught to speak, to express, to make themselves heard. But no one teaches them to be silent. To listen. To understand that there are things that can only be heard when everything else goes quiet. That's insane. Is it? Think about it. How much of what people say matters? How much is just noise, filling the void, drowning out the important things?" She gestured to the children. "They understand now. They've learned to quiet themselves. And in that quiet, they can hear it." "Hear what?" "The old voice. The first voice. The one that spoke before humans invented language. It's always been there, waiting in the silence between words, in the gaps between thoughts. Most people never hear it because they never shut up long enough. But children can be taught." I lunged for Riley, but the moment I crossed the threshold of the circle, something happened. The air became thick, resistant, like moving through water. All 7 children turned their heads in unison to look at me, and I saw their eyes had changed. They weren't green or brown or blue anymore. They were black. Completely black, like looking into deep wells. "Riley," I managed to say through the resistance. "Fight this. You're stronger than whatever she's doing to you." But Riley just tilted her head slightly, studying me with those wrong eyes, and then she opened her mouth. No sound came out, but I heard it anyway, a voice that bypassed my ears entirely and spoke directly into my brain. It wasn't Riley's voice. It was older, colder. It said, "Father, be quiet. You're disturbing the teaching. I staggered back, breaking free of the circle's influence. Ms. Wren was watching me with an expression of satisfaction. You heard it, she said. The old voice. It speaks through them now. They're becoming vessels. Pure vessels, emptied of their own noise, ready to be filled with what wants to be said. You're putting something inside them. You're possessing them. Possession implies force. This is invitation. They invited it in by learning to be quiet. They made space for it. She turned back to the children. Now they'll carry it out into the world. They'll teach others. The silence will spread. Eventually, everyone will be quiet enough to hear. And when everyone hears, the old voice will finally be able to speak again. I should have called the police right then. Should have run from that room and gotten help. But I couldn't leave Riley. I couldn't abandon her to whatever this was. How do I stop it? I asked. How do I save her? Ms. Wren considered this. You can't. The teaching is complete. Riley is no longer who she was. None of them are. But she walked to her desk and picked up a book, old, leather-bound, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. There is a way to understand. To join them. To learn the teaching yourself. You want me to let that thing into my head? I want you to stop fighting. To accept what your daughter has become. The alternative is losing her entirely. At least this way you'll both be part of something greater. I looked at Riley, at my daughter who wasn't my daughter anymore, who stood silent and empty-eyed in that circle with 6 other hollowed-out children. I thought about Melanie arriving tomorrow expecting me to have fixed this. I thought about all the normal moments I'd taken for granted. Riley chattering about her day, singing along to the radio, laughing at jokes. All of that was gone. Replaced by this terrible silence. No, I said. I won't join your cult. I won't let that thing have me too. Ms. Wren's expression hardened. Then you'll leave here and forget what you saw. You'll convince yourself Riley is fine. Just going through a phase. You'll tell yourself that silence is better than the alternative. A daughter who screams, who fights, who suffers as we try to extract what's been so carefully planted. Because that is the alternative, Mr. Torres. Try to save her and we'll have to hurt her. Badly. To burn out the old voice. Most children don't survive that process intact. Was a trap. Every option was a trap. If I left, Riley stayed like this. If I fought, they'd destroy what was left of her. If I joined, I'd become another empty vessel. There had to be another way. That's when I noticed something. The book Ms. Wren had been holding, she'd set it down on the desk and it had fallen open. The pages were covered in text but not in any language I recognized. Except, there. In the margins. Handwritten notes in English. Instructions. And one phrase that caught my eye, the teaching can be interrupted by noise. Sufficient volume. Sufficient chaos. The old voice cannot tolerate discord. Ms. Wren saw me looking. Her expression shifted to alarm. Don't? But I was already moving. I grabbed the desk chair and swung it at the windows. The glass shattered, alarm piercing the air. I shouted, screamed, made every noise I could think of. And then I did something I'd never done before. I sang. Badly. Off-key. Every nursery rhyme and commercial jingle and stupid song I'd ever heard, all at once at the top of my lungs. The children in the circle flinched. Riley's hands went to her ears. Ms. Wren was shouting something, but I couldn't hear her over the alarm and my own voice and the sound of more windows breaking as I continued my rampage through the room. The black in the children's eyes began to recede. Not all at once, but in stages, like something was slowly releasing its grip. Riley's eyes were the last to clear, and when they did, she looked confused, frightened, and finally, like my daughter again. Dad, she said. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it was hers. Dad, where am I? I ran to her, pulled her out of the circle, and kept singing, kept making noise, even as Ms. Wren collapsed to her knees, hands over her ears, shrieking something that might have been words but sounded more like the death throes of something ancient and angry. I carried Riley out of that room, down the corridor, past teachers who were just arriving, past Mrs. Hartwick who was running toward Building C, past all of it. I didn't stop moving until we were in the car, doors locked, driving away from that school and that room and the thing that had tried to hollow out my daughter. Riley cried the whole way home. Real tears, real sobs, real emotion, the most beautiful sounds I'd ever heard. When Melanie arrived later that day, she found us on the couch, Riley talking nonstop about nothing in particular, just needing to fill the air with words, with sound, with proof that she was still herself. Melanie wanted explanations, wanted to call the police, wanted to go back to that school and raise hell. But when we called, we were told Ms. Wren had resigned. When we visited, Building C was locked, room 107 empty. No tutoring program. No consent forms. No evidence of what had happened except for Riley's notebooks, filled with those 3 sentences repeated thousands of times. We burned the notebooks. Moved to a different district. Riley started therapy, though she never told the therapist the full truth. How could she? Who would believe that something ancient and patient had tried to speak through her, that it had needed silence to propagate, that it was still out there, finding other Ms. Wrens, other schools, other children who could be taught to be quiet. Sometimes, late at night, Riley still goes silent. Not the good kind of silence, the comfortable quiet of contentment. The other kind. The heavy kind. When that happens, I sing. Badly. Loudly. Every stupid song I know. And Riley joins in, her voice mixing with mine, creating beautiful, chaotic, life-affirming noise. Because we understand now. Silence isn't always golden. Sometimes silence is dangerous. Sometimes silence is a doorway. And sometimes the only way to stay human is to make as much noise as possible. Even now, years later, Riley talks constantly. Chatters. Fills every gap with sound. People find it annoying. I find it perfect. Because as long as she's talking, I know she's still here. Still herself. Still fighting against the quiet that tried to claim her. And on the rare nights when she has nightmares, when she wakes up unable to speak, I sit with her and we sing together until her voice comes back. Until the silence releases its grip. Until we're both certain that the teaching, the real teaching, the important one, is this. Be loud. Be chaotic. Be gloriously, messily human. Because in the noise is safety. In the noise is life. And in the noise the old voice cannot speak. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't listening. Always listening. For that moment when the world gets too quiet. When the silence becomes too heavy. When something starts teaching the children to stop talking. Because Ms. Wren was wrong about one thing. The teaching isn't complete. It's never complete. There will always be another quiet room, another circle of children, another voice trying to fill the silence. And there will always be people like me, ready to break the windows and shatter the quiet, armed with nothing but noise and love and the absolute certainty that some silences should never be learned. Riley's talking right now, actually, downstairs. Telling some long, rambling story to her friends about something that happened at her new school. I can hear her laughter. Her voice. Her beautiful, chaotic, perfect noise. And I've never been more grateful for a sound in my entire life. Story 3, the partition story 3. The house had a room that wasn't on the blueprints. I found it 3 months after moving in, on a night when insomnia had me wandering the halls at 3 a.m., trailing my fingers along walls I was still learning. The house was old, 1920s, the realtor had said, with that particular smile real estate agents use when old means problems were not legally required to disclose. But it was cheap, and after the divorce, cheap was all I could afford. I'd been measuring for bookshelves, trying to figure out if the weird alcove in the hallway was deep enough, when I noticed the measurements didn't add up. The hallway was 12 feet long according to my tape measure, but when I measured the rooms on either side, my bedroom and the bathroom, they only accounted for 10 feet. 2 feet of space missing. Just gone. I pressed on the wall between the rooms. Solid. I knocked. It sounded hollow. It took me 20 minutes to find the seam. It was hidden in the wallpaper pattern, a vertical line so perfectly aligned with the design that you'd never notice it unless you were looking. And once I found that, I found the other seam and then the top and bottom. A door. A door that had been papered over, painted over, hidden so completely that 3 months of living here hadn't revealed it. I could have left it alone. Should have. But I was curious and lonely, and there's something about hidden spaces that calls to the parts of us that never quite grew up. I got a utility knife from the kitchen and carefully cut away the wallpaper. Beneath it was more wallpaper. And beneath that more. 7 layers in total, each one older than the last, the patterns tracking backwards through decades of decorating trends. The final layer revealed a door. Plain wood, no handle, no lock, just a door that pushed inward when I applied pressure. Beyond it was a room. Small. Maybe 6 by 8 feet. Empty except for dust and a smell like old newspapers. There was no light fixture, but enough illumination spilled in from the hallway to show me the walls. They were covered in writing. Not graffiti. Not the random marks of bored teenagers or squatters. This was methodical. Organized. Every inch of wall space covered in small, neat handwriting, the words forming columns that ran from floor to ceiling. I stepped inside, holding up my phone for light, and started to read. The writing was a list. Names, I realized. Thousands of names, written in what looked like the same hand, though the ink varied. Some entries in pencil, others in pen, some in what might have been marker or crayon. Some names I recognized as common. Michael, Jennifer, David, but others were strange, old-fashioned, or simply foreign. And next to each name was a number and a word. Michael Thompson, 7, partition. Sarah Chin, 3, partition. James Morrison, 12, partition. Elizabeth Blackwood, 1, partition. The pattern repeated hundreds of times. Thousands. I stepped further into the room, following the columns up the wall, and that's when I noticed they were dated. The earliest entries were from 1923. The most recent was from 3 months ago. 3 months ago. Right when I'd moved in. And there, at the bottom of the most recent column, in ink that still looked fresh, David Reynolds? Partition. David Reynolds. That was me. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the wooden floor. In the sudden darkness, I heard something. A sound like breathing, but not quite. More like the house itself was exhaling, the walls expanding and contracting around me. I scrambled for my phone, found it, and backed out of the room quickly. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Once I was in the hallway, I looked back. The room was just a room. Empty. Dusty. Nothing threatening about it. But my name was on that wall. My name was on a list with thousands of other names, all marked with the word partition and a number. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with every light on, drinking coffee and trying to rationalize what I'd seen. It had to be some kind of record. Previous owners, maybe. The numbers could be anything. Years lived here, number of family members, something mundane and explainable. And someone had added my name recently as a joke or a warning, or because they were documenting the house's history. But that didn't explain why the room had been hidden. Why someone had gone to such lengths to paper over the door, to make it disappear. When dawn finally came, I called the realtor. I have a question about the house, I said. The one on Maple Street. Did the previous owners mention anything unusual about the layout? Unusual how? She asked, wary. Like, hidden rooms. Pause. No. Why do you ask? Just curious. How many previous owners were there? Let me check. I heard typing. Quite a few, actually. The house has changed hands 17 times since it was built. Which is unusual for a house that old. Usually you see longer ownership periods. 17 times in 100 years? Yes. Average ownership seems to be about 6 years. 6 years. I thought about the numbers next to the names. The highest I'd seen was 15. The lowest was 1. Do you have records of who owned it and for how long? I can request those from the county. May I ask what this is about? Just trying to understand the house's history, I said. Thanks. I hung up before she could ask more questions. Then I went back to the hidden room. In the daylight streaming through the hallway window, it looked even more innocuous. But the writing was still there. The names. The numbers. My name. I started taking pictures of the walls, documenting every column of names. It took hours. When I was done, I had hundreds of photos on my phone. That evening I started researching. The first name I looked up was one from 1923, Margaret Voss, 8, partition. It took some digging through census records and newspaper archives, but I found her. Margaret Voss had purchased the house in 1923 and lived there with her husband and 3 children until 1931, when she died. The obituary was brief, unremarkable. Natural causes. She'd been 47. 8 years. She'd lived here 8 years and the number next to her name was 8. The pattern held for every name I checked. The number wasn't random. It was how long each person had lived in the house before they died. Because everyone who made it onto that list had died. Some of natural causes, some of accidents, some of causes the old newspaper articles described as mysterious or under investigation, though I found no follow-up articles, no resolutions. I kept researching, working backwards through the names. 1923 to 1930, Margaret Voss, 8 years. 1930 to 1933, Harold Chin, 3 years. 1933 to 1945, Martin Blackwood, 12 years. On and on, each name corresponding to a documented death, each number accurate to the year. The last name before mine was Elizabeth Shaw. She'd bought the house 6 months before I had. Her number was 1. And according to the obituary I found, she died of a heart attack exactly 1 year after moving in, 3 months before I purchased the property. The realtor had never mentioned that. Never mentioned that the previous owner had died here. But what about the other names on the list? There were thousands of them, far more than could have lived in this house. I picked a name from the middle of the wall, Thomas Werner, 23, partition, and searched for him. Nothing. No census records, no obituaries, nothing. It was as if Thomas Werner had never existed. I tried another name. Another dead end. And another. Most of the names on that wall had no documentation at all. They weren't previous owners. They weren't residents. They were something else. I didn't want to think about what. But I couldn't stop myself from going back to that room, from standing in front of the wall and staring at my own name. David Reynolds? Partition. The question mark. That's what terrified me most. Because all the other names had numbers. They knew. Whoever or whatever maintained this list knew exactly how long each person would live here. But my number was blank. Unknown. Undecided. Or maybe not yet determined. That night I heard sounds in the walls. Scratching like someone writing. I told myself it was mice or the house settling or the pipes. All the normal explanations for old house noises. But I knew better. I knew it was that room, that list being updated. In the morning I went back. There was a new name on the wall right below mine. Amanda Kessler? Partition. I looked her up immediately. Amanda Kessler lived 3 streets over. I found her Facebook page. She was looking at houses in the neighborhood, had posted just yesterday about putting in an offer on a charming fixer-upper on Oak Street. She was going to move here. To this neighborhood. And once she did, her number would appear on the wall, and she'd have that many years to live. Unless I warned her. Unless I stopped her. I drove to Oak Street, found the house she'd posted about, and knocked on the door. No one answered. It was empty, waiting for new owners. I left a note in the mailbox. Don't buy this house. Trust me. A concerned neighbor. That evening, Amanda Kessler's name was gone from the wall. I stood in the hidden room, staring at the space where her name had been. The ink had faded as if it had never existed. And I understood then what I was dealing with. This wasn't a record of the past. It was a record of the future. The room, the partition, whatever that meant, was documenting not what had happened but what would happen. And I just changed the future. Or tried to. Because when I looked down at my own name, the question mark was gone. In its place was a number. 1. 1 year. I had 1 year to live in this house. Or 1 year to live at all. I stumbled out of the room, my vision swimming. This couldn't be real. This was insanity. Houses didn't predict deaths. Walls didn't document futures. There had to be another explanation, something rational, something that didn't involve predestination and supernatural murder lists. But I couldn't think of one. And as the days passed, as I watched that number stay stubbornly fixed at 1, I stopped trying. Instead, I started experimenting. I made plans to move out. Called movers, started packing, found a new apartment across town. The number stayed at 1. I canceled the movers, unpacked. The number stayed at 1. I booked a flight to another state, packed a suitcase, drove to the airport. Got on the plane. Flew 2,000 miles away. The number stayed at 1. Because it wasn't about the house. Not really. The house was just the partition, the place where the list was kept. But the list itself was something else. Something that tracked people, marked them, counted down their time. And once you knew about the list, once you saw your name on the wall, you were bound to it. The house had marked me the moment I moved in, and cutting away that wallpaper to reveal the hidden room had simply made me aware of what was already true. I had 1 year. I flew back home, because what was the point of running? I spent weeks in that hidden room, reading every name, looking for patterns, trying to understand the mechanism behind the partition. Some names had large numbers, 40, 50, even 60. Others had single digits. A few had 0, which I assumed meant they died the moment they became aware of the list. Or maybe even before. There had to be a way to change it. If I'd removed Amanda Kessler from the list, maybe I could remove myself. Or change my number. Extend it. There had to be rules, logic, something I could manipulate. I tried everything. I covered my name with paint. It bled through. I scratched it out. The wall repaired itself overnight, the name returning fresh and clear. I tore down the entire wall, breaking through the plaster to the studs beneath. The writing appeared on the studs. I burned them. The writing appeared in the ash on the floor. The partition couldn't be destroyed because it wasn't really physical. The room was just an interface, a way for whatever managed the list to communicate with our reality. The true partition existed somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't reach. But I could still change things. I'd proven that with Amanda Kessler. I'd intervened in the future, altered the timeline, and her name had vanished. Which meant the list could be changed. Which meant I wasn't helpless. I started looking at the other names, the ones with question marks. There weren't many. Maybe 20 in total, scattered throughout the columns. Each one represented someone whose future was undecided, whose number of years hadn't been determined yet. What made them different? I researched everyone I could find records for. Most turned out to be people who'd lived in the house briefly and then moved away quickly, A few weeks, a month at most. They'd left before the partition could calculate their duration. But a few were different. A few were people who'd never lived in the house at all, who had no connection to this address I could find. Like Amanda Kessler. She'd never lived here, never even visited. But her name had appeared on the wall because she was going to move to the neighborhood. The partition's reach extended beyond this house. It tracked people in the area, potential future residents, marking them before they even knew they were marked. Which meant it was tracking other people too. People who lived on this street, in these houses, who might eventually move into my address. And if I could identify them, warn them, keep them from ever coming here, I could save them. And maybe, in saving them, I could save myself. I spent the next 3 months documenting every name with a question mark. I found addresses, phone numbers, social media profiles. I sent anonymous warnings, stay away from Maple Street. Don't ask why. Just trust me. Most people ignored me. Some blocked me. But a few listened. And every time someone listened, every time they changed their plans and avoided this street, their name vanished from the wall. And my number increased. 1 became 2. Then 3. Then 5. I was buying time. Literally. Every person I saved added to my own duration. The partition was transactional. It traded futures. For every person who escaped the list, someone else could stay longer. And since I was the one doing the saving, the years accrued to me. I became obsessed. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, spent every waking moment monitoring the wall, watching for new names with question marks, tracking them down, warning them away. My life became a cycle of surveillance and intervention, of stealing people from the partition's inventory and hoarding the time for myself. By month 8, my number was at 24. By month 10, it was at 45. I was good at this. I developed a system. I could identify potential future residents faster than the partition could mark them. I could reach them with warnings before they even knew they were in danger. I was beating it, outsmarting it, winning. And then I found the other entry. It was on a wall I'd examined 100 times before, but somehow I'd never noticed it. Maybe because it wasn't written in the same neat columns as everything else. Maybe because it was hidden at the very bottom, near the floor, where shadows made it hard to read. Or maybe because the partition hadn't wanted me to see it until now. David Reynolds, 45, partition. David Reynolds, 72, harvest. 2 entries. Same name. Different numbers. Different words. Partition. Harvest. I didn't know what harvest meant. But I knew my number had been increasing, and it had stopped at exactly 45. And there was a second entry, a future entry with a higher number and a different designation. I wasn't escaping the list. I was moving through it. From partition to harvest. And whatever harvest meant, it was 72 years away. Except the years weren't age. They were duration. Duration in the house, or in the system, or in whatever reality the partition inhabited. Which meant harvest would happen in 72 years from when? From when I moved in. From when I found the room. From right now. I heard something behind me. It sounded like footsteps, but not quite. Like the echo of footsteps displaced in time. I turned. The room wasn't empty anymore. There were people standing along the walls, dozens of them, translucent and flickering like bad video projections. I recognized faces from my research. Margaret Voss, Harold Chin, Martin Blackwood. All the names from the list, all the people who'd lived and died in this house over the past 100 years. They were here. Not ghosts, not exactly. More like recordings. Impressions. Partitions. And they were all staring at the wall where my name was written. At the entry that said harvest. One of them stepped forward. Elizabeth Shaw, the woman who died here 3 months before I moved in. Her mouth moved and I heard her voice, faint and distant. You can't avoid harvest. No one can. It's what the partition was built for. What is harvest? I asked, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. The collection, she said. When your time is complete, when you've accrued enough years, the partition opens fully. And what's been living in it comes through. To collect what it's owed. What is it owed? Everything you took. Everyone you saved. Every year you stole from the list. Her image stuttered, glitching like corrupted footage, then stabilized for just long enough that I could see her eyes, hollow, reflective, filled with something like pity. Everything you borrowed, she whispered. Everything that was never yours to keep. The others, those flickering figures lining the room, began to shift, turning their heads slowly toward me in perfect, unnatural unison. Their outlines warbled, stretched, trembled. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. The plastered walls seemed to pulse, almost breathing. You think you outsmarted it, Elizabeth said. No one outsmarts the partition. You fed it. You enriched it. And now it's almost ready. I stepped back, but the room didn't allow it. The doorway behind me dissolved into the same bluish haze that outlined the figures. The partition was sealing itself, closing the room like a vault. Ready for what? I asked, though my voice came out thin, distorted by the oppressive pressure. Elizabeth's head tilted with a sickening crack. For the crossing. The lights inside the hidden room flickered violently. The writing on the walls, from decades of names, began to glow faintly like molten metal cooling. A sound rose from deep below the foundation, a low thrumming vibration that rattled my teeth. The translucent figures stepped aside, forming a path that led toward the far corner of the room, the one place where I had never seen writing. Until now. A jagged tear appeared there, like a rip in old wallpaper, except it opened into nothing, an impossible slit of void. Darkness inside the tear was deeper than shadow, deeper than night. It swallowed light. It devoured sound. The edges pulsed, stretching, widening. Something behind that tear moved. Elizabeth's voice came again, barely more than breath. 72 years is the duration the harvest requires. Not for you to live, but for it to grow. The tear widened enough that I could see shapes shifting inside. Not forms. Concepts. As if something colossal existed in a dimension that didn't understand the constraints of ours, and was trying to express itself anyway. My vision doubled, tripled, collapsed into static. My ears rang with a low-frequency hum that made me nauseous. My name on the wall brightened suddenly, both entries. David Reynolds, 45, Partition. David Reynolds, 72, Harvest. The second entry pulsed. What? Twice. A countdown beginning. The translucent figures knelt. Every single one. Elizabeth lifted her face toward me, her expression strained, barely holding herself together. You shouldn't have taken what wasn't meant for you, she murmured. Every life you diverted fed the harvest's approach. Every year you added gave it the strength to open wider. The tear yawned violently, and a blast of freezing air filled the room. My breath crystallized. The walls moaned. The numbers across the surface began to rearrange themselves, rippling like ink dropped in water. Then something pushed through the tear. Not an arm. Not a limb. Something worse, an idea of a limb, a shape that hurt to look at, as if my brain didn't have the vocabulary to process it. My eyes watered. My lungs tightened. My vision smeared into streaks of red. I stumbled backward, but the room bent with me. Space warped. The door was gone. The ceiling seemed miles away. The floor dissolved into something like wet stone. The room was no longer the room. Elizabeth's voice echoed, now blended with dozens of others, layered, overlapping. You weren't extending your life. You were preparing the way. I screamed, not out of fear but because the thing emerging from the tear made every nerve in my body ignite. The figures bowed lower. The tear widened to the size of the entire wall. My number on the partition wall surged. 72, 71, 70, 69, 68. A countdown. The harvest had begun. Something reached into my chest, not physically, not truly, but conceptually, and squeezed. My knees buckled. My vision fractured. You gave it enough, Elizabeth whispered. Now it takes back everything. The tear swallowed the wall. Then the ceiling. Then the figures. Then the air. And then it swallowed me. The last thing I heard before the world dissolved was Elizabeth's voice, distant and fading. You shouldn't have looked behind the wallpaper. Darkness. No sound. No breath. No time. Just the partition. Still counting.